I walked into my parents' house on Christmas Eve and saw a new family photo above the fireplace. Everyone was in it, except me. I'm Alina, and instead of yelling, I handed them legal papers that changed everything. I didn't expect warmth, but I didn't expect that. Snow slid from my coat in thick clumps as I stepped into my parents' foyer, brushing the damp from my scarf before hanging it on the same hook I'd used since high school. The scent of rosemary, lemon, and cinnamon drifted from the kitchen, holiday smells I used to love, back when they still meant something. I turned toward the living room, footsteps muted by the thick rug. That's when I saw it. Hung just above the fireplace, commanding the room like a crown jewel, was a newly framed family portrait. Glossy, professional. The lighting softened everyone's expressions, the composition artfully balanced. My mother, in her signature red blazer, smiled like the world adored her. My father, arms behind his back, wore the stiff grin he usually reserved for business functions and golf photos. Maddie, of course, took center position, blonde hair falling just right, dressed in soft beige, laughing at something invisible, as if caught mid-charming anecdote. And me? I wasn't there. Not shoved to the edge, not blurred in the background, just gone. It wasn't a bad crop, it was a clean one. Precise. Intentional. I stood there a moment too long, breath catching, not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. Some part of me, some tired, long-neglected part, had always expected this. From the kitchen, my mother called cheerily, "Dinner's almost ready." I swallowed, blinked, and forced my mouth into something resembling a smile. The envelope in my coat pocket pressed into my ribs like a reminder. I hadn't planned to say anything until tomorrow, but the photo changed that. In the kitchen, Linda was whisking a bowl like she was on morning television. "There you are," she beamed, wiping her hands on a cloth napkin. "You made it just in time." Maddie swirled wine in a wide glass and kissed my cheek in the air, kiss way she'd perfected in grad school, close enough to gesture, far enough to never actually touch me. "You drove all that way in the snow?" she said, as if I'd trekked across the Arctic, not just 2 hours down from Raleigh. I nodded. The roads were fine. Thomas appeared behind them, pulling off his reading glasses. "Still driving that little car?" That little car. Not, "How are you?" Not, "Where are you living now?" Just another chance to remark on how temporary, how provisional my life must still seem to them. Dinner was, as always, a performance. My father carved the roast like he was auditioning for a cooking segment. My mother fussed over which plate Maddie should use for her side salad. No one asked what I'd been working on, or where I'd traveled. No one asked anything at all. Maddie described her latest brand partnership with a cruelty-free skincare line. "Honestly, their serums are changing my skin. I feel 10 years younger." "You look radiant," my mother said, already mid-pour of the second glass. Thomas nodded. "There's a brightness to you, a kind of glow." I watched the candles flicker against the glassware. My plate had a chip in the corner, just enough to notice. The silverware didn't match. No one else's place setting looked like mine. After dinner, we exchanged gifts. Maddie went first, of course. A soft gasp, a delicate unraveling of tissue paper, and then, "Oh my God, you guys, a vintage Omega?" "Not brand new," my father said, modest, "but well cared for. We thought you'd like something timeless." "I'm obsessed," Maddie whispered, pressing the watch to her wrist like it was a newborn. "Seriously, I'm speechless." My mother beamed like the moment was a scene she'd written herself. Then came mine. A square box, lightweight. I peeled the tape in silence. Inside was a ceramic mug, white with curly lettering. Somebody's favorite daughter. I held it up. My mother laughed. "Isn't that cute? We saw it and thought of you." "Of course," I murmured, turning it in my hands. The handle was shaped like a heart. No one noticed I hadn't taken a sip from it all night. Eventually, I excused myself, said I was tired from the drive. My mother offered the guest room, not your room, not the old room. The guest room, Beige sheets, a dusty bookshelf, one flickering lamp that blinked if you breathed too hard. I closed the door gently behind me and stood in the center of the room for a moment, listening to the muted clinks of dishes being rinsed downstairs. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. It was heavy in my hands. Thick ivory stock, sealed with a faint gold crest. I had debated when to hand it over, maybe after the stockings tomorrow morning, or after Maddie inevitably posted her curated holiday brunch plate to Instagram. But standing in that living room, looking at that photograph, they hadn't forgotten me. They had erased me, quietly, carefully, like a brand they'd decided no longer fit the aesthetic. I sat on the edge of the bed, flicking the lamp back to life again, and stared at the envelope. My thumb traced the seal, slow and deliberate. The weight of it felt right, like truth in paper form. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't plan a speech. I'd screamed in silence for too many years, and this time, the silence would be mine. I looked out the window. Snow was still falling, thin and slow like the end of a movie. My reflection barely held in the glass, just faint enough to miss if you weren't looking. I whispered into the stillness, "I thought I'd wait until morning. But maybe you don't deserve that." And I placed the envelope on the nightstand, just close enough to reach. The next morning, the house smelled like cinnamon rolls and expensive coffee. My mother always liked her holidays to feel curated, something between a catalog and a memory. Light piano music hummed from the Bluetooth speaker on the counter. Maddie sat cross-legged on the couch, already dressed in a matching lounge set that looked too nice to actually sleep in. I stood quietly at the edge of the room, watching the performance unfold. Wrapping paper piled like snowdrifts on the rug. Maddie gasped in perfect intervals as she unwrapped gift after gift. "Oh wow, Mom! This is the one I circled." Thomas smiled, already moving on to the next package. Linda laughed, her phone in hand, angling for the perfect candid of Maddie holding up a designer tote bag like it was an Oscar. No one looked at me. I took a sip of lukewarm coffee from my novelty mug, somebody's favorite daughter, then slipped the envelope onto the table between the scattered bows and empty pastry plate. They didn't notice. Not at first. They never did. But they always noticed eventually. Just too late. I sat back and watched. Linda was still adjusting her hair in the reflection of the glass cabinet when she reached for it. I saw her fingers hesitate as she touched the ivory paper. It didn't belong. No name, no ribbon, just weight. She turned it over once, then again. "What's this?" she asked, almost to the room itself. I didn't speak right away. Thomas glanced over, frowning. "Did you bring something else?" "That's from me," I said, tone even. He nodded, half smiling. "You didn't have to get us anything." "I know," I replied. "I wanted to." Linda sat back down, holding the envelope with the same caution she used when handling store returns without a receipt. "Should we open it now?" I shrugged. "I'd rather you didn't." "So, of course they did." Thomas leaned over her shoulder as she broke the seal. The sound of the paper sliding free was louder than it should have been. Maddie was still admiring her tote, folding the handles just right like she was preparing it for a photo shoot. Then the silence changed. It thickened. Linda flipped to the second page, then the third. Her eyes scanned faster, lips parting just slightly. Thomas's jaw tightened as he adjusted his posture, like sitting up straighter might change the words on the page. Maddie looked up. "What is it?" They didn't answer. She tried again. "What's going on?" Still nothing. I took another sip of coffee and leaned back. "I figured it was time you knew." Thomas looked up first. "Knew what exactly?" "That," I said, nodding toward the envelope, "is a copy of Grandpa's will." Linda blinked, caught somewhere between confusion and calculation. "I've seen his will. We handled the estate." "No," I said calmly. "You handled what you told me was the estate. You never showed me the full version. You just said there were a few keepsakes and some cash that went toward funeral expenses." She blinked again. "Too much." I continued, steady. That version didn't mention the rental property in Old Briar. Maddie straightened. Wait, what rental property? I turned to her. The one you used for that editorial shoot last fall, by the park, with the brick porch and the vine-covered gate, that one. Her mouth opened, closed. Thomas dropped the papers onto the table like they'd burned his hands. Where did you get this? Public records, title searches, tax filings, a few archived emails, and a very patient lawyer. Linda placed a hand on his arm. Sweetheart, this isn't what it looks like. I tilted my head. That's funny, because it looks like you used my name, my inheritance, and my legal rights to fund your lifestyle while telling me there was nothing left. It wasn't like that, she said too quickly. It was complicated. It wasn't, I said. The will is clear. The house was left to me, sole beneficiary, full title transfer, which means all that rent you've been collecting, technically stolen, and those renovations, unauthorized. Thomas rubbed his temples. You always jump to the worst interpretation. No, I said. I jumped to the legal interpretation. Maddie looked stunned, like someone had just rewritten her backstory. But that house paid for my tuition. I know, I said. And the car, and the trip to Mexico, and probably a few handbags along the way. That's not fair, she snapped. You didn't need it. You were always the independent one. You never asked for help. Because I was told there was nothing to ask for, I replied, because you made sure of that. Linda softened her voice the way she always did when trying to sound gentle in a boutique. We didn't think you'd want the responsibility. You were busy. You always lived so far away. I was far away, I said quietly, because you made it clear I wasn't welcome here. Thomas leaned forward. You need to calm down. I looked directly at him. And you need a lawyer. He froze. I'm not suing, I added. Yet. But I've officially reclaimed ownership of the property. The tenants have been notified. Rent payments now go through me. Your access is revoked. Linda's face turned pale. But that house. It was our income. We depended on that. I nodded slowly. Then maybe you shouldn't have stolen it. We're family, she whispered. No, I said. You're people I used to be related to. There's a difference. Maddie stood. You think this makes you better than us? No, I said. Just not beneath you anymore. The room went still. No one moved. No one blinked. Thomas stood up, jaw tight. If you walk out that door, don't bother coming back. I stood too, sliding my arms into my coat. That might be the first thing we've ever agreed on. And I left the room without looking back. 3 weeks passed. The first thing I noticed was that I wasn't waking up in the middle of the night anymore. No dreams, no tightness in my chest, no dread about what awaited on my phone screen come morning. For the first time in what felt like years, I slept through the night and woke to light, not to panic. The rental house, which had always smelled faintly of other people's stories, old wood, coffee grounds, a trace of lavender from a plug-in air freshener, was slowly becoming mine. Not in the way realtors or lawyers mean, but in the way home sinks into your bones. I started cleaning in small circles, one drawer at a time, one cupboard, one shelf. I didn't rush. The dust didn't bother me. If anything, it felt honest. It was better than silence pretending to be love. In the front room, tucked behind a cheap bookshelf, I found it, an old navy blue armchair I vaguely remembered from childhood. The upholstery was faded, the armrests frayed, but the shape was unmistakable. I ran my fingers along the wood trim, the same way I used to do when I was small, when I'd sit there during family visits and try to make myself invisible. This was the only piece I decided to keep. Everything else I donated or listed online. The table that looked like it belonged to someone else's Pinterest board, the bar cart with one broken wheel, the framed inspirational quotes my parents must have hung during the rent-ready phase, gone. I rearranged what was left, not for guests, not for photos, just for me. The messages started coming the second week. An email from my mother. Subject line, just checking in, heart eyes. Hi, sweetheart. We've been thinking about you. I know things got intense, but maybe we can talk soon? Hope you're well. Love, Mom. There was no punctuation after love, just that awkward hanging phrase like she didn't know how to sign off when things weren't nice. I didn't reply. A voicemail from my dad followed a day later. I didn't listen to it, just stared at the notification and deleted it. Then Maddie messaged me on Instagram, which I didn't even know she remembered I had. So are you seriously not talking to anyone? Because mom's crying every day and dad is stressed, and I'm just trying to make sure the family doesn't fall apart over one misunderstanding. I closed the app. It wasn't silence that hurt anymore. It was the realization that I'd accepted so little for so long and called it love. One morning, I noticed a small leak under the kitchen sink. I tightened the fixture, wiped down the floor, and left a note for the downstairs tenants just to check in. The next day, a square envelope appeared on my porch. Inside was a card with a watercolor leaf on the front and a note scribbled in blue ink. "Thank you for fixing the faucet. You're the first landlord who remembered my name." That made me stop. It wasn't a big thing, but it meant something. Someone saw me, not as a tool or a resource or an afterthought. Just a person. I taped the note on the fridge and smiled. Later that week, I bought a small ceramic pot and planted basil in it. I named the plant Grace. It sat on the kitchen windowsill, soaking up the winter sun. I watered it every morning. Watching it grow became the most consistent ritual I had. I didn't tell anyone. There was no one to perform for, and I liked it that way. A few days into January, I stood outside the house as the sky dipped into early twilight. I was holding my phone at arm's length, trying to line up the shot. The porch light cast a soft glow over the snow-matted walkway. The front steps had been repainted a few days earlier. Nothing fancy, just clean and white. I smiled without trying. My boots crunched as I shifted. Click. The photo was simple. Me, in front of the house, holding the keys. No one else in the frame. No one cropped out. That night, I printed it, slipped it into a silver frame I found in the hallway closet, and placed it on the mantel, where the other photo had once hung. It was a little crooked. I didn't fix it. I stood there for a while, watching the fire flicker in the grate. The room felt warmer, not just because of the heat, but because it no longer felt borrowed or staged. It was mine now. Mine, in the way peace is yours when you've earned it. Not by winning, but by refusing to lose yourself again. I looked at the photo and smiled. "This one doesn't need cropping," I whispered, and for the first time in a long time I didn't feel erased. I felt real. The email came in while I was watering the mint. Subject line, "FYI, they might have to sell the condo. Just thought you'd want to know. Congrats." No greeting, no sign-off, just those 3 clipped lines from Maddie, each one a thread dipped in vinegar. She knew what she was doing, dressing guilt up as casual concern, as if this were news I'd been waiting for, or some milestone I should frame like a diploma. I deleted the message without reading it a second time. Outside, the March air had started to shift. Still crisp, still laced with winter's chill, but soft enough now to carry birdsong and the promise of green. My small garden was still more soil than bloom, but the rosemary bush had survived the frost, and the basil I'd planted by the window had stretched 2 new leaves toward the sun. I crouched beside the porch and pulled a few early weeds. The house was quiet, just the wind chime ticking gently, the creak of an old step as I shifted my weight, and the buzz of my phone. Again. This time, I didn't even check who it was. I wiped the dirt from my hands, set the phone face down on the porch railing, and went back to work. That afternoon, Sylvia stopped by. She was my neighbor from 2 doors down, widowed, mid-70s, a former biology teacher who now spent most of her time gardening and walking her golden retriever, Daisy. I liked her company. She never asked too many questions. She stood just beyond the fence, one hand resting lightly on the latch. "I saw you painting last week," she said. "The porch looks good, clean." "Thank you," I replied, brushing my hands on my jeans. She nodded toward the rosemary. "Coming back strong." I smiled. "I guess some things do." Sylvia tilted her head slightly, watching me in that calm, deliberate way older women do when they've seen too much to waste time on small talk. "I always thought you were the quiet one," she said. "Turns out, you were the strong one." I didn't answer right away, just pulled a loose thread from my sleeve. "Sometimes, quiet is the only way to stay strong." She nodded. "And sometimes, it's the only way to stay sane." She left soon after, Daisy tugging her gently down the sidewalk. I watched them go, then stood on the porch for a while, breathing in the stillness. Later that evening, I made tea and opened the front window a crack. A soft breeze wandered through the screen, carrying the faint scent of someone else's dinner, garlic, maybe onion, and the low hum of a radio playing something old and slow. I sat in the blue armchair with a book in my lap I hadn't opened all week. I wasn't reading. I was just sitting, letting the quiet fill the room without needing to explain itself. The mail arrived just after 6. I almost missed it, just a soft clink of the box, but something told me to check. I stepped onto the porch barefoot, rubbing the warmth of the mug between my palms. The envelope was cream-colored, thicker than usual. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. My mother always wrote in loops. Her lowercase g curled so wide it looked like it belonged in calligraphy. The ink was dark green. She must have used her special pen, the one she only brought out for birthdays and sympathy cards. I stood on the porch with the envelope in my hand for a long time. I didn't open it right away. I didn't go inside. I just stood there, watching the sky shift from gold to gray. Eventually, I went in, set the mug on the table, peeled the seal gently like it might tear if I breathed too hard. 2 pages, both handwritten. Neat, careful, not a mistake in sight. "Dear Alina, we've been thinking about you. We're sorry for how everything turned out. We didn't mean to hurt you. We thought you were okay. You always seemed so independent. We didn't think you needed us. Things were tight after your grandfather passed, and it just seemed easier to manage things the way we did. We know you feel left out, and maybe we didn't say it enough, but we've always been proud of you. Maybe we made mistakes. Maybe we didn't do things perfectly, but we hope someday you'll come home. Maybe we can start over. Love, Mom." No mention of the stolen rent, no acknowledgement of the forged paperwork, no ownership, just softness. Deflection, a blanket apology that hoped to cover too many winters with one thin sheet. I folded the letter once, then again, and placed it in the drawer beside the others. That was its place now, among the collection of words that never really said what needed to be said. The drawer didn't lock. It didn't need to. Some silences don't require a door slammed shut. Some boundaries are made from something stronger. That night I turned off my phone completely. I didn't need its noise, or its buzzing reminders of who I used to be in that family. Instead, I sat on the porch again. The stars were faint, but they were there. The air was cool, my sweater sleeves pulled down over my hands. The quiet didn't feel like absence anymore. It felt earned. Spring didn't arrive all at once. It drifted in slowly, through the lavender pushing up beside the back fence, through the mint that spread across the planter box when I wasn't looking, through the basil by the kitchen window that now had leaves as wide as my palm. I hadn't planned any of it, but some things grow when you stop trying so hard. It was early April, and I'd just finished turning the soil when I found myself naming the new herbs. The tall rosemary sprig became resilience. The thyme in the smaller pot was boundaries. The basil naturally stayed grace. I whispered the names out loud as I watered them, amused by how much they sounded like forgotten ants from another generation. Still, they suited the space. They suited me. I had started spending more time outside. The backyard wasn't large, but it had a quiet way about it, enclosed by a weathered wooden fence and framed by soft grass and clusters of daffodils that bloomed in their own rhythm. There were birds now, too, wrens mostly, a pair of cardinals, sometimes a dove. One afternoon, I came home from the grocery store to find a basket on my porch. Inside were 6 blueberry muffins, still warm, wrapped in a linen towel. Tucked beside them was a note. "Thank you for keeping the walkway salted this winter. Thank you for fixing the hallway bulb. Thank you for being the kind of landlord who makes this place feel like home. No name, just a smiley face and a drawing of a little basil sprig. I brought the muffins inside, set them on the table, and stood for a long time looking at them. Not because they were fancy, but because they were enough. And I hadn't realized how long it had been since something had been given to me without expectation. I ate one over coffee that morning. It tasted like patience. A few weeks later, I stopped by the community center on Maple Street. I'd seen a hand-painted sign for a casual art workshop, Sketch and Sip, Thursdays at 6. I didn't plan to stay. I thought I'd peek in, maybe smile politely, and leave before anyone could ask too much. But the room smelled like fresh paper and lemons. There were water pitchers filled with mint and limes, and everyone there seemed to be trying but not proving. The facilitator, a woman in her 50s with streaks of silver in her braid, handed me a soft pencil and said, "Sit anywhere. You don't have to show anyone what you make." So I stayed. I sat at the corner table and began to sketch. Lines at first, a shape I remembered. I didn't know what it was until halfway through, until I saw the porch posts and the crooked shutters and the window I used to sneak out of in high school. It was my old house, the one I grew up in, not drawn out of bitterness, not out of nostalgia, just memory, just acknowledgement. When the facilitator passed by again, she glanced at the page and smiled. "Looks like it's still standing," she said. I nodded. "It is, just not mine anymore." She tapped the corner of the page gently. "Sometimes that's okay." The next day was my birthday. I didn't tell anyone. There was no need. I'd stopped expecting the grand text messages, the group chats, the public declarations that came with private silences. Instead, I walked down to the small florist 2 blocks away and picked out a bouquet of yellow tulips and white daisies. I wrapped them in brown paper myself and wrote, "To me, from me," on the card. Back home, I baked a small vanilla cake with lemon glaze. I cut 1 slice, made tea, and sat on the porch in the sun with my bare feet on the warm wood. There was no one to sing, no one to post photos, no one to ask about candles or wishes, and I had never felt more celebrated. That afternoon, I brought out a small can of black paint and a stencil. The mailbox had always been blank, just a faded sticker from the property management company that had handled it before me. I peeled it off slowly, scrubbed away the residue, and painted my name in neat block letters, A. Briggs. It wasn't an announcement. It wasn't a statement. It was a simple truth. I lived here now. I belonged here. Not because someone gave me permission, but because I finally stopped asking for it. When the paint dried, I stood back and looked at it, hands on my hips like I'd just finished building something. The sky was pinking at the edges, and the smell of mint drifted through the air again. I walked back to the garden, brushing my fingers across each labeled pot. Resilience, boundaries, grace. Then I closed my eyes and breathed in deeply, letting the sun rest on my skin, the earth settle beneath my feet. "Everything's growing just fine," I whispered. And it was. I ran into Mrs. Everett at the local bookstore, wedged between the memoirs and gardening section. She looked the same, hair coiled neatly into a bun, oversized sunglasses perched atop her head even indoors, floral blouse pressed like she'd stepped out of 1978 and hadn't changed since. She blinked, adjusted her glasses, and smiled. "Well," she said, looking me up and down, "you look happy." I didn't flinch, didn't ask why or what she meant, or whether she really believed it. I just nodded and replied, "Thanks." It was the kind of exchange I used to overthink. I'd have replayed the tone, the eye contact, the placement of her compliment, wondering if it was coded or if I'd imagined it all. But now it just was. We talked briefly, books, heat waves, tomatoes that wouldn't ripen. Then she touched my elbow lightly and said, "I hear your parents had a rough time of it." There it was. I tilted my head, not coldly, but gently. "I hope they're okay." She nodded once, then again, as if satisfied. "You look good. You look settled." "I am," I said. And I meant it. When I stepped back outside, the air was syrupy with summer. The sidewalk shimmered, the storefronts hummed with the soft whir of fans and iced drinks being sipped too quickly. A teenage couple laughed across the street, walking barefoot in flip-flops with slushy cups in hand. Life, as it turned out, kept going, quietly, without need for permission. Back at the house, I carried a brown paper bag of second-hand books into the living room. The porch was finally finished. New paint, softened edges, the wind chime Maddie once gave me now hung by the door. I hadn't put it up for sentimental reasons. I just liked the way it sounded when the breeze pushed through. Light, delicate, like glass deciding not to break. A note had arrived in the mailbox the week before. A card, really. Christmas in July theme. A watercolor snowflake on the front and just 4 handwritten words inside. Thinking of you. Hope you're well. No name. No return address. I didn't respond. The card went into the same drawer as the others. Not out of bitterness, but because it had nowhere else to belong. Word had gotten around, through neighbors, acquaintances, Sylvia. My parents had sold the condo. The market hadn't been kind. The mortgage caught up. Maddie had launched a GoFundMe to support my new creative chapter, with a photo of herself in a sun hat, holding a paintbrush like it was a torch. It raised $112. One comment read, "Didn't your family used to be rich?" 2 of the donations were anonymous. One was from an ex-boyfriend of hers I vaguely remembered from college. I tried not to laugh. I really did. Inside, I stacked the books on the hallway table, then walked to the mantel. The framed photo still sat where I left it. Me in front of the house, smiling, keys in hand, no edits, no filters, no one cropped out to make someone else shine brighter. It wasn't a perfect photo. I was squinting slightly. My shoes didn't match, but it was mine, and for once, that was enough. I traced the edge of the frame with my thumb. A small layer of dust had begun to gather along the top. I didn't wipe it away. Some things, I'd learned, were allowed to settle. Outside, I heard laughter, one of the tenants and her son playing with a garden hose in the driveway. He shrieked with joy as she sprayed him, the kind of laughter that bubbles up without planning, real, messy, unrehearsed. I stepped onto the porch, barefoot, letting the heat of the woods seep into my skin. The wind chime tinkled behind me. A bird landed on the railing and watched me without fear. I sat down, a glass of water in hand, and looked out at the yard. The herbs were still thriving. Resilience had grown wild, pushing past its pot in soft defiance. Grace leaned toward the light like it always had. Boundaries, funny enough, had stayed exactly where I'd planted it, not an inch more. I thought about the years I'd spent trying to shrink myself into acceptability, the holidays I'd shown up with gifts and silence, the birthdays I pretended didn't hurt, the way I used to measure love by how much I could endure without complaint. They used to say I was hard to love, I thought. Then I smiled. Turns out I was just too quiet to be convenient. The porch creaked as I leaned back. The wind moved through the chime again, steady, soft, certain, and the world, just as it was, kept turning. The wind chime by my door sang softly in the evening breeze, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like something was missing. I didn't need apologies carved in marble. I had peace planted in basil and a name painted on a mailbox. Sometimes we spend a lifetime waiting to be chosen by those who were supposed to love us, but the real turning point comes when we choose ourselves, with no audience, no applause, just quiet certainty. If this story touched something in you, I hope you'll share your own path toward healing, whether it's quiet, messy, or still unfolding, because every story deserves to take up space in the frame.